fitting in the practicing was hard. My husband did amazing things by getting the kids out of the house on the weekends, involving our entire extended family, getting them out and busy, because I can't practice at home with kids there. So I was able to my goal was 2 hours every day, some of which happened. Some days I got more. Some days I got a half an hour. And it was a really hard process.
Today's guest and I go way back, as you will hear in this episode, and it was great to have her on the podcast. Long overdue for sure. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and today we're chatting with Sarah Hogan Kaiser, who plays bass in the St. Louis Symphony and who I've known as you'll hear, for years and years. Such a great person and such an interesting, thoughtful person. I know you're going to enjoy today's conversation, done live at the 2019 International Society of Bassists Convention. I love chatting live with people, and it was great to chat with Sarah at her alma mater, Indiana University. Thank you so much to our sponsors, D'Addario Strings, Upton Bass, The Bass Violin Shop, Texas Hill Country Bass Collective, A440 Violin Shop, and Colstein Music. More on them later, but here we go with our conversation with Sarah Hogan Kaiser. Sarah Hogan Kaiser.
Indeed. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
We were just trying to figure out when we did the Spoleto USA Festival together.
Nearly 20 years
late
ago.
Late 90s or ish, or somewhere around there.
There. Yeah, a long time ago. Good
I know.
times in Charleston, South Carolina, though.
I remember it fondly. Now, there was this ridiculous summer where like everybody got a job but me in that group.
And that wasn't me.
No, well, St. Louis Symphony, I beg, not that year, but like Scott Pingle, I think was that year. Okay,
he was.
Then let's see if I can remember who else was there. Was Jennifer there?
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer Downing was there in
Yep.
that section. Kristen.
She might have been there
that
summer.
I think so.
Yeah.
Jeremy Kurtz, I think, might have been in that section.
Yes.
Okay. Yep. There he is. Small world.
Yep.
Okay, so I think it's that. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I'd heard. So we just saw Joel Braun, who said, "Oh, you were the bassist growing up in St. Louis. You were the new hot talent in Missouri, right, or something to that effect."
That's what he was saying. I guess
Okay.
so. I don't know. I won a big scholarship one summer to go to Interlochen Arts Camp.
Yeah.
And 2 people from the state of Missouri won.
Okay.
And I was one of the people. And it wasn't something that I would have been able to do without that scholarship.
Yeah.
So that summer was a really pivotal summer for me.
Yeah. And I'd heard your name before doing Spoleto. I was like, oh, Sarah Hogan is an amazing bass player.
Oh.
And so anyway, I remember it was fun to meet you. I think we were on a stand together for Flying Dutchman or something like that.
That sounds familiar.
Stretching my memory.
Yes.
I remember it being
We
a
played
whole
a lot
of
of
notes.
rep.
Yeah.
I remember watching most of the notes fly by.
And I think that was I haven't thought about this in a long time, but I'm thinking about, was it Emmanuel Villaume? Was that
I
the
think
conductor?
so,
I remember
yeah.
he was very sweaty,
Yes.
like extremely sweaty man. Like the sweat would pour off and then drip down his nose. And I also get sweaty conducting and stuff like that, so it's not no diss on him, but I do remember that.
Yeah, well, it was Charleston too.
Well, that didn't help either.
Yeah.
And one more spoiler question, and then we can get to you. Wasn't there this horrible outdoor concert? Did you do that? Do you know what I'm talking? Maybe we didn't do it that year. I did it 2 summers.
Okay.
One year, you would remember it if you did it. Maybe we got out of it or they canceled it, but they'd been doing it for decades. It was on the edge of a swamp outdoors at night.
Ooh, that doesn't ring
Okay,
a
if you don't
bell.
remember. And so there were all these lights above us. So what would happen, it would be fine, and then it would get dark. And then all these bugs would come out and fly into the lights and die and rain on the orchestra.
That I did not experience.
Okay,
that.
and I remember talking to my teacher, Michael Hovnanian, who was in the Chicago Symphony. He did Spoleto USA like 20 years before that. And he said, oh, yeah, that was happening 20 years ago. So
Like a rite of passage.
You escaped. Okay.
Yes, thank God.
Okay, so take me back. So you grew up in St. Louis or the St. Louis area? Or
right in the western suburbs of St. Louis.
Okay.
Yep. And everyone in St. Louis wants to know what high school you went to. That's the big question. I went to Parkway South.
Okay.
If there's anyone listening.
Okay.
St. Louis.
Which there probably is.
You never know.
When did you get into music?
My elementary school, I went to a public school, had a great strings program, and the strings teacher, her name was Gayla Rothermick. She's still with us. She's a wonderful little lady with so much energy. She started me on the violin, and seeing how tall I was, she really wanted me to play the bass. And she's just this little spitfire of energy, like I said, and she just more or less made it happen. We had this brand new bass that only I was tall enough to play, and she called Henry Lowe, the former principal of the St. Louis Symphony, and told him that he needed to teach me. And so we went for lessons.
How old was that?
It was the summer before my 7th grade year. And actually, this is a funny story. I was in his home playing his student model bass. He said I didn't need to bring a bass. I brought my bow. And he was telling me so many things all at once, and it was really humid. He didn't have central air, and I fainted.
Really?
And he caught the bass, and I kind
Not
of
you,
no,
but the bass.
he caught the bass. Wonderfully, he caught the bass, and I kind of came to on my way down. But it was kind of like this overload of information. And so whenever I give a young student a lesson, I always try and tell them that I have fainted in a bass lesson. Whatever you're going to do today with me is going to be just fine.
That's a good way to frame it. That's great.
Anyway, I studied with him for a long time through my junior year in high school when he had to retire and became ill. And then I started studying with Carolyn White.
Okay.
For the remainder of my high school.
And when did Interlochen fit into that?
Interlochen happened the summer after my junior year of high school.
Okay.
Where I met Mr. Hurst.
Okay.
And Indiana was something that my parents had been talking about with me. As we thought of schools that I could go to, they wanted me to stay within a day's drive of home.
Yep.
And I was on board with that. And I wanted to go to a big school where I could go to basketball games and experience the whole student life. Like, I was pretty sure I wanted to be a performance major, but I also did a minor in mathematics. And I wanted to also have, like, just in case, like, music education offered at that same school. Mm-hmm. So Indiana was a natural choice for me, especially after having worked with Mr. Hurst at Interlochen. So,
and here we are at Indiana University.
Yes, we are. 20 years after I graduated. Well, 19. I graduated in 2000. But I'm going to see Mr. Hurst tomorrow. I'm so excited. I haven't seen him in many years. So.
And there are always a lot of great students at IU, and you had a great crew there. I know a few of them, but who was there during your time? Was John Grillo there during your time?
He was.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, he was a senior when I was a freshman. Okay. Actually, he and this other bass player, Ryan Sheenbein, who I don't know whatever became of Ryan, but he and Ryan and Jennifer Downing and I got season tickets to basketball games, and they like took us under their wing, and we all went to see Bobby Knight and his crew play.
Wow.
It was really fun. So John Grillo was here. Dan Kreckler plays in the Met. Let's see. But in my kind of class, my close circle of friends was Jennifer Downing, of course, Sam Hager plays in San Diego, Paul Danola plays in National. There's so many.
Sure, too many to count.
Yeah,
that's great. That's very cool.
Yeah, we had a great time.
And so much of the success. Obviously, the teacher matters a lot, but that cohort is so important.
It is so important. And going to college, we looked at a bunch of schools, my parents and I, and it was so important to me that there were like a lot of bass players. Like I didn't want to be the not to. Whatever. I didn't want to be the big fish in a little pond.
Yeah, sure, of course.
My parents were very aware of that and wanted me to go somewhere where there were a lot of bass players where I could look up to them. So
yeah, for sure. That's why when I get a student coming through there, I know that if I can get them into one of the youth orchestras back in Chicago or now in San Francisco, that's when it takes off, because they realize, I'm first chair at my school, but I'm last chair in the youth orchestra, and these people are all real good.
Yes.
And you can sort of graph to almost 100% of the students, that take me up and actually join the youth orchestra. You can graph that progress exponentially.
Right. That summer, actually, at Interlochen, I kind of went there thinking, well, I've been first chair in St. Louis for a while, and first chair at Allstate, all this stuff, and then I got to Interlochen thinking, well, how good can these students be? I work really hard. Man, was I blown out of the water. Rufong was there that summer.
Oh, wow.
So I had a big awakening with what a young bass player can really do. It was so good for me. I learned how to practice with a metronome and a tuner. It was pivotal.
Well, growing up in South Dakota, I thought it was hot stuff. I was like first chair all-state orchestra every year.
Of course.
Because there are only like 9 bass players in the whole state.
Oh my gosh.
I'm sure, sorry, South Dakota people, but I'm sure there are more now. And I remember getting to Northwestern, and my dad was with me, and the assistant conductor, we ran into him, who I'd met. I did a summer program there. My dad basically said, he's like a really big deal. I just wanted to let you know. And the conductor was like, oh.
Sure he is.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks, Dad.
But I actually it was funny because that was the year that Jeff Bradage left to go to North Texas, taking basically the bass studio with him. So I ended up being a fish. I won't say big fish, but a fish in like a no pond, And so I desperately wished for that cohort. And I actually came down a few times and drove to Indiana University and stayed with Tim Pearson.
Tim Pearson, of course. How could I leave him off my list?
Hi, Tim. And took lessons with Bransby and with Hurst.
Yeah.
So I loved, and I remember coming down and meeting Colin Corner for the first time. I think he was like a freshman or something.
Yes, he was a freshman when I was a senior, I think.
Yeah. So it's fun to see that cohort, and where they move through, and you've had that in other chapters of your life too. People.
Right.
So Indiana, awesome. Actually, did you study with
Mr. Hurst?
Hurst. Okay.
Yeah.
I love to do this with people who study with well-known teachers, and sometimes I compile what people talk about.
Yes.
So feel free to, and we can always edit. But any favorite memories of Hurst or funny stories or anything like that?
Well, I mean, it's such a. I mean, the 4 years, they kind of blend together.
Yeah, of course.
But what Jennifer and I were talking about on our trip here was just what a great, general bass education we got from Mr. Hurst. We learned all the strokes. Mm-hmm. We learned how important it was to make Mozart sound like Mozart and Brahms and Beethoven. And I remember him turning on the recordings during rep class and playing along. Yeah. And I remember him saying, if it sounds good up bow, it should sound good down bow, with the strokes, learning how to even them out and getting a really good background with a wide variety of solo repertoire, just a really good foundation to build on. I had a great time my 4 years here with him. Yeah. So, and then I was ready to get out of the little bubble that can become Bloomington and so then I went to Rice in Houston and studied with Tim Pitts. Okay.
I got a chance for the first time to meet Tim Pitts. I was playing with Tim.
Oh, in Iris.
In Iris. He drove his ridiculous bass, the Busan, I think, down to or over or whatever to Memphis. And it was so that was a great time. What a great person.
Oh my gosh, I would love to play with it, now to play with him.
Right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It'd be a dream.
Yeah, it's so cool to get a chance to play with a major teacher in your life, down the road. I had the chance to I studied with Michael Hovnanian at Northwestern, one of the Chicago Symphony bassists, and I got the chance to play in a bass quartet with him for a while, many years later, and so it's so fun. So talk about another great cohort, Rice.
Yes.
Who was at Rice with you? And don't feel obligated to name everybody. But
there were so many.
Yeah.
I mean, basically everyone I was at Rice with is gone to do great things. Yeah. A much smaller bass class, 14 or 15 people. Mm-hmm. But David Doriso was there with me, who plays in the section in St. Louis now. His wife, Daisy Gillespie, was there. David Molina, Jeremy Kurtz. No, I met him later. There's so many, Sean Conley. I think Ted Botsford might have started. No, Jory Herman was there. I think Ted came after I left.
So many. People want to check it out. I did a project a few years ago where I put together a kind of like a profile on all these different schools and people that have landed major jobs. And Rice was the most hilarious one in terms of you have to keep scrolling to see all the people.
Oh, yeah. A bunch of guys that play in Boston now. Tom, sorry, Tom, I'm forgetting your last name. Do you know him? And Ben. They're two, anyway.
Two Boston players. Yeah.
Totally. Ben Levy. There we go. There we go.
And studying with Tim.
Tim was great to study with. Such a kind way of teaching, but yet very straightforward. And I knew how long it took for him to say, good when I was done playing, how good it was or not, and we just worked on all the rep and the strokes, and he just really solidified for me how to play excerpts, and just, he still follows up with me. I just took an audition in St. Louis, and he was very much a part of my process, just with support and sending some videos. And so he's just a very supportive and involved teacher. I had a great time with him.
Well, he's such an outgoing guy. I love it. So Iris, we have these after parties, and you just hear in the background, "Hi, I'm Tim Pitts. Hi, I'm Tim Pitts. Hi, I'm Tim Pitts."
That's awesome.
And I would get texts from him about this or that, or about some bass, or right. No, I love it. And always like in a funny time. I mean, not a weird time, but just like So okay.
Yeah. So Tim was great, and then one really great thing about going to Rice is just the interaction between the two studios, and I got to work really closely with Paul Ellison, even though he wasn't my teacher, so to speak, just through masterclass, and I took 2 semesters of independent study with him. So he was just involved and around, and I mean, sometimes I remember one time specifically I was in my practice room. He could see that I was kind of upset, and he was walking by and he came in and helped me work through a bow stroke. He just 10 minutes, he was just there with me, helping me out. And it was just like that's the stuff that happens at Rice.
Yeah.
They're both teachers were just there and present and ready.
This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Make sure you have the right size string for your bass. String sizes are determined by playing length, the distance from nut to bridge. If your bass has non-standard after lengths before the nut or after the bridge, you may need a different size than you think. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Bass players tend to look for bows in slightly different ways than other string players. Here's A440's Michael Spadero on what he's observed with bassists looking for bows.
Here's one thing I've noticed over the years. Violinists and cellists tend to gravitate toward more expensive bows, and with bass players, I give them as little information as possible, and a lot of times they'll end up selecting a $200 bow that feels great to them and works really well with their instrument.
Learn more about the selection of bows and basses and everything else online at a440violinshop.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. And that's obviously continued over the years. I have some former private students of mine that have gone there in recent years, and it's a very similar kind of vibe. Special place. Too bad we couldn't just clone Rice and have there be 12 to 20, whatever more of them. The only problem with Rice is it's so insanely hard to get in.
Yes, so. I don't. Somehow I got in. Well, I don't know, because I didn't. I had met Tim at Music Academy one summer. He wasn't teaching there. His wife was, and so he knew who I was, but he didn't know me. But
did you do New World Symphony?
I did for one season.
One season. Okay.
Yeah, I actually extended my master's at Rice. I did 3 years.
Did you really?
I felt like I wasn't. I convinced them to give me an extra year. Felt like I wasn't ready to face the world yet, and so then I was in New World for 1 year, and then I got a 1-year position with St. Louis, and then I had to re-audition again and got the tenure track.
What made you think you weren't ready?
I don't know. I just didn't feel ready to take auditions.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I had that spine yet. You know? And my roommate was taking a 3rd year, and I thought, ooh, this sounds fun. And I just knew I had so much more to learn from the two of them. I still do. I wish I could go back for summer camp or something, But they listened to my request and gave it to me. And Rice is very generous with their funding. And it was no problem for me to stay.
It's interesting. I've talked with several people about, basically I ask them, do you think people take auditions too early? Because I think I started taking auditions stupid young. I didn't know what I was doing. I was 18. And I think I ended up having some, for the experience or whatever, but I think I ended up with some really weird baggage early on. So I've wondered not to say, and I've had a lot of private students take auditions early-ish too and be successful. So I don't know that it's necessarily a cut and dried thing, but I've wondered about that a lot.
Well, it works out for some people. We have a new member of our St. Louis Symphony bass section who's a student here at IU, and he's 19, and we're looking forward to working with him in the fall.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. That's great. One of my private students named Dan Carson, he took an audition while he was at IU and got principal bass of the Alabama Symphony.
Right, yeah, he just subbed with us. It was really nice to meet him.
Yeah, wonderful player. Yeah, and then decided, which is a courageous decision in today's employment environment, to leave the job and go start studying again.
Yeah.
I think he was maybe like splitting his time trying to finish because he never really finished his degree at Indiana.
Oh, okay.
I might be not remembering this right. But then he's out at USC.
Right.
And then he won a job in the Lyric Opera of Chicago, and decided not to take it. Another courageous decision.
Yes.
So it's really, it's interesting.
Holding out for something really great.
Well,
he's a great player.
He is a great player. He is a great player. Yeah. So St. Louis, and now you just said you took an audition recently.
I did take the audition we had 2 section spots open and associate open. So I went for the associate spot.
And you may or may not have, and you don't have to tell me, but auditioned for other orchestras over the years. But that something that it might have been David Allen Moore asked me to start asking people, or it might have been somebody else. But no, I think it was a listener. Sorry, Dave. But auditioning when you have a job is a real difference. And we can say also kids, responsibilities, adult life. That's probably real different from that grad school experience or those years. And just even like nitty gritty stuff like practicing. When you practice. So full-time job, family, and other responsibilities, and then you're trying to like ramp up for an audition. Talk about that.
Yes. So our associate position came open, and I wasn't sure if I'd take it because I have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old who are the light of my life, and a wonderful husband. We have a great family life. And so I'm working full-time with the orchestra. I'm momming, as I say. And the position came open, and we started to rotate sitting in that associate spot, and I just grew to really like it. Yeah. So it was kind of on the horizon, and I decided to take it. And it's really hard to do for a lot of reasons it was hard. Finding time to practice was really hard. I was one night I started practicing at 10 o'clock. Ugh. And my kids get up at 6 or 6:30, so it was fitting in the practicing was hard. My husband did amazing things by getting the kids out of the house on the weekends, involving our entire extended family, getting them out and busy because I can't practice at home with kids there. Right. And so I was able to my goal was 2 hours every day, some of which happened. Some days I got more. Some days I got a half an hour. Yeah. And it was a really hard process. Also because I hadn't taken an audition in 14 years. I'm 41. Warming up takes a lot longer than it used to. And also I had a baby last January, or 2 Januaries ago. He's 16 months old, but luckily with St. Louis, we have a really long maternity leave. So essentially, I had 8 months more or less away from my bass when this last season started. So I kind of had a lot of things going against me, but I thought that I had to try. Yeah. And I'm so glad I did, because I got in amazing shape. And my husband and my kids they bonded so much by doing all the fun things they did without me. And that day, what it came down to for me was that I hadn't done it in 14 years. And I had played for all the people. I had played on stage at Powell. We are so lucky as musicians to get to play on that stage so much. It's a wonderful stage. But I hadn't been behind the screen for 14 years. And I thought I did all the right things, but when it came down to it, I couldn't keep my cool, and it didn't go well. And I was so shocked. I played for 5 minutes, and I had music to make, Jason. Like I had music prepared, and I was excited to share it. Play like a recital, and it just didn't pan out for me. And
isn't that interesting how like you can practice all the elements that toward the audition, but really like the only way you can practice an audition exactly is to take an audition, right? And the only way to practice an audition, like say, like you go take a community orchestra audition, that's a very different thing than auditioning for a group like St. Louis Symphony. That's a really hard thing to, even if you are doing all the right things and getting up and playing for people and recording yourself and the checklist of everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I used to be really good at auditions. That was my jam. I liked going to auditions.
Did you really?
I did. I got to see all my friends.
Yeah, that's true.
I advanced a round or two. I was somewhat successful, even if I didn't win the job. It was fun. I got to go on a trip.
Yeah.
I mean, of course it was stressful and all that, but I didn't mind it.
Yeah.
Because most of the time when I was taking auditions, I was in New World. I had something to fall back onto. I was never like, this is it.
Right.
So, but this audition was kind of it. It was kind of a once-in-a-career opportunity, depending on what ultimately happens with the position.
Right.
But I think that'll probably be the last audition for me.
Yeah.
Which is kind of sad. There's some grief following the audition.
Sure.
But
yeah.
I think that's okay to talk about.
Well, the auditions kind of sound fun, actually. Hear you talk about, because that is true, right? You get to see folks. You get and especially if you're in a position where you're doing at least moderately well, like moving forward, like an affirmation of your playing.
Yes.
And then trips are fun, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, it was but this one wasn't as fun. After they didn't call my name and I didn't advance, I kind of just was in a state of shock. Like, really? And I wanted to ask if I could play again, which you can't do.
Right.
And then I went home and sat on the couch for 2 hours before I went to pick up my kids from daycare.
I was always such a disaster. Like that audition experience. I've done okay at a couple of auditions, but like, I like to be able to take it. I don't know. It's something that's I've always. I guess I haven't done a lot of other competitive things like that in my life. Like I didn't really play sports or I didn't do anything. So that never really. And I was so for me. When I decided consciously I'm done with auditions, I felt like this weight lifted off of me. And I actually think I started to get to be a better bass player because I wasn't like freaking out in my mind every time I started.
And trying to play something how you think that the committee wants to hear it.
Yeah, trying to make others appreciate my, or trying to. Try to figure out what others want.
Right.
Play to please other people.
Right.
I guess. Something like that. So
it goes.
Yeah.
Moving on.
So life in the St. Louis Symphony, like just day-to-day life. Just talk about what's a season look like.
Well, we're 43 weeks, which I think is awesome that we get some time in the summer to do whatever we want. I used to play some festivals and stuff, but now with the two kids, I'm happy not to. My husband's a teacher, so we have basically all of July and a little bit of August together.
What does he teach?
He teaches elementary PE.
Wow.
Yeah, he loves it. He's great. So we got our mid-September through the end of June. The season through May is full of subscription concerts. The occasional, we call them Live at Powell, which are basically Pops concerts. We do movies. We play with tribute bands. They call it getting butts in seats, which is great. But this season we have a new music director, Stefan Denev, and everyone is thrilled to have him officially start. We've had a lot of building up to it. So
I've said it a million times. You're making something by hand out of wood. You can do everything right and it can still go sideways.
That's Eric Roy of Upton Bass talking about their concept of no B stock. And though it's painful to work a piece of wood for days and discover some flaw, the right call, and this is what Upton does every time, is to just get rid of that wood and start new. You never know what's going on under the surface. Despite your best efforts, wood is an organic thing, and Upton takes its commitment to quality seriously. Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Texas Hill Country Bass Collective. Join them July 22nd through July 25th for their 6th annual Austin Bass Workshop. Come join friends from the area for 4 days of music, bass, and fun, and work with 2019 featured guest artist and former podcast guest Dennis Whitaker. Learn more at TexasHillCountryBassCollective.com. It's a beautiful thing to get somebody new, and with San Francisco Symphony just hired Esa-Pekka Salomon, and they're just so people are just so thrilled in that orchestra. Not that they don't like MTT or that all people that there's a universal thought or whatever, but just to have somebody new is a really big deal. And they put
change of tide.
Yeah. They put a photo of Esa-Pekka right next to our brand new Salesforce tower, and it's like the new San Francisco or whatever. So.
Yeah, it's a different chapter for everyone. Yeah. So same in St. Louis. Everyone's really excited to get rolling. We've already made a couple of recordings with Denev, which was interesting. Like we haven't. It's like having a baby before you get married. We're only engaged. We're not married yet. But everyone is thrilled for him to come and start.
What's the art scene like in St. Louis?
We're a smaller city, but we have a thriving, it's called Jazz at the Bistro, like a jazz center. We have a bunch of really great museums. Our history museum and our art museum are free, which is wonderful for the city. And we have some other, some other modern art museums for people to check out, and a couple other chamber music series outside of the symphony that happen. So, and there's all sorts of rock and roll and other live music that's happening, and so I think it's a thriving arts town.
Yeah.
But since I grew up in St. Louis, I'm a little biased. I love living there. I'm so happy to be back there.
It seemed like a cool town to me. I haven't spent a lot of time there, but I've been through, especially when I was younger. We always took these family trips from South Dakota to various places. And I've explored, is it Hannibal, Missouri? Is that where Mark Twain? Yep. My dad was all about Hannibal, Missouri, so we've been there. And St. Louis, and I've been up in the Arch and downtown St. Louis. And
Cardinal games.
Kind of thing. Yeah, we never went to games. That's the competitive thing. I never did anything like sports related. My parents were very not anti, but I've never. But I'm aware of the Cardinals and their legacy. Yes,
and the Blues are in the Stanley Cup playoffs right now.
Wow.
So,
well, how do you doing something like staying inspired in the orchestra? I've talked about this with several people in different major orchestras, and it's interesting what people do to stay, and some people don't stay inspired.
Yeah.
But I think I would hope that most do, or find a way to. Any thoughts on that?
That's a really good question. That's something I'm at ease saying that I've struggled with. Yeah. Because playing the audition is the hardest part about the job, basically. So whenever there's really good rep coming my way, I just try and really practice it as well as I can, and just have a lot of respect for every concert that we do, for someone to, it's not just another day at work. I mean, it's someone's musical experience for the evening, you know?
Right.
So they might only come once, you know, you got to make it special. So I try and just make it, I don't know, it is my job, but I try and just be prepared, and so that as a bass player, that doesn't mean hours and hours of practicing, but I'm just, especially with this audition and how in shape I was, it felt really good. So I'm hoping to keep that up, and it makes going to work so much more fun, and to just be able to play and sound good, and feel good playing. Yeah. So that's one of my goals for next season, is to stay on top of it.
That's awesome. I hear you 100%. I went through about 10 years where I'm not going to say I didn't practice the bass, but it was like emergency practicing only for and then ever since moving to California and sort of blowing up my professional life, I've had a lot more time, and so I started practicing more, and I've been having more fun now and being in shape than certainly than those 10 years, because it was always it's kind of a bummer. Everything felt like a little blurry. I could get it through. My brain was working. I've done it enough, but it's and I think you think that you're on your game, but you don't realize how blurry your game maybe has become, or there's no feeling like really being, in shape that.
And being proud of what's coming out of your instrument and playing with your stand partner rather than just trying to get by. So.
Yeah, but it's an easy thing. It's like a slippery slope, I think.
It's just 1 year at a time. It just starts to you stop warming up before rehearsal, and you start doing other things. Then you've got 2 kids. It's like, man, if I can just get to rehearsal, So
I don't even have kids to as
but you live a full life,
Yeah, but I went I think over 10 years without ever learning one new piece besides like what was being played in an orchestra. Like I guess chamber, but I never learned one new solo thing. Like not one new movement of Bach, not one new anything. And the last 5 years or so, I've been really exploring new, and it's been fun to like practice new stuff, not Bottesini, not my like stale audition, not that they're bad pieces, but my audition pieces I did for years and years.
Right. I mean, how many times can you refresh?
Yeah.
The Von Haller, the Kuznetsky,
Yeah, well, I don't know. Yeah. So John Grillo, bring him back up. I remember he was asking, he went up to Hal Robinson once and he was like, how can you even listen to Mozart 40 anymore? Like how can, I don't know what Hal's response was, but it is an interesting thing to think about.
Right. Well, we just played Mozart 35 for the first time.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago. I had never played it in the
Really?
orchestra, and we played with Live From Here, Chris Thiele's show.
Yeah. Oh, how cool is that?
It was awesome, but as part of, the St. Louis Symphony was the musical guest. So one thing we played was the last movement of Mozart 35, and man, was I glad I had that under my fingers because it was so fun. To actually play it with my band, so to speak.
Yeah, that's great. And getting, even if a piece, like how many times, like Scheik 5 or whatever, like Warhorse, great piece, but like played so often that a lot of people are like, ugh. Yeah, but then you get that great conductor, that new conductor and music director, and all of a sudden, like things like that can become very exciting. Of course, yes. And that's one thing that, like we just recorded Symphony Fantastique with Deneuve, and I mean, how many times have we, that's programmed often. Right. And we just, his ideas were fresh and exciting and a whole new breath of life because that's kind of how he is. Yeah. And it was fun. Oh, that's cool. I had a great time. So anyway, it depends a lot on the conductor. Yeah. I got to come to St. Louis. I got to come see the St. Louis Symphony, and especially with the new conductor. That's really cool. He's got a big mop of hair. He's dancing all over the place. Got to have conductor hair. Conductor hair helps. Yes, that's for sure. It sure does. Yeah. Okay, thank you for chatting. Sure. It's so great to finally do this. And I keep anytime somebody recommends somebody for the podcast, I make sure I write it down. Okay. And you've been on my list like many times. Wow. Your name has come up. So, cool. And I decided recently, it's like, and I chat with people on Skype or whatever, but it's so much more fun to like sit down. No, this is great. I'm so glad that we had the chat. Let me wrap up with one question I typically ask people. Yes. And so here we are at Indiana University. How old were you? Probably 18 when you started here. Okay, so go back to 18-year-old Sarah and give her some advice. Well, gosh. Jennifer told me you were going to ask me this question. And I think I would tell myself to just look forward to getting out of my little St. Louis bubble and just enjoy what everyone else is doing around me and know that I've got a long way to go, but it's all going to work out. Just like I kind of thought like, well, how good, like about Interlaken, what I was thinking, how good can these bass players be? They were good. And so just to take it all in and play a lot in masterclass and spend some time with the bass. Yeah. Oh, and one thing Mr. Hurst always did is he always recorded our lessons on these tapes. I should have listened to every lesson. I listened to a lot of them, but not everyone. Not everyone. Love it. Anyway, one thing I wish that we don't have to talk about now, but in general, if you would talk with more women about what it is, I don't know how you would talk about this, about what it's like to play the bass when you're pregnant. Oh, wow. Because I was so uncomfortable, and I played fairly late into my last pregnancy that there was nothing that I could read about, or like I didn't know who to ask. Like, what should I do? And I'm sure everyone is so different. That's an interesting thing to dig into. What? Rather than springing that on someone in the middle of it, what I could maybe do is like put out a call on social media or something like or email and like who'd like to talk about it or found some strategies or something like that. Yeah, who has something to offer. That is something I haven't given much thought to myself for obvious reasons. But like now, like being a working mom and like and I had one child and then like trying to practice. I don't know, just playing like. I think there's a reason there aren't that very many like very large bass players because you can't
possibly put the bass
Right.
close enough to you.
It's very challenging, right? Yeah, exactly. If you think about it, I wonder how some people play, just like
Right.
thinking about how the various ways that I get around or get over the bass, in
Right.
particular situations. Okay.
Yeah, there was a whole lot of like blocks involved, and like I was holding the bass with my knees, kind of trying to keep it off my
Wow.
belly. Like it was
Okay.
just-
Okay, that is a
I
future
played
topic for
very
sure.
late into my pregnancy, which
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
Anyway.
Well, thank you. I will do that. And thanks for chatting, Sarah.
Of course,
Okay.
I loved it.
Cool.
Yeah.
This is great. Sarah, great to catch up. Thank you so much for chatting. I really had a great time, and I know that folks listening appreciated this conversation. Again, I said it a bunch of times, but long overdue, and just great to catch up with an old friend and see what they're up to. So I hope you enjoyed this, and if you have other ideas for guests like Sarah or any guest ideas in general, reach out to me at feedback@contrabassconversations.com. I'd love to hear from you. And while you're on your computer or your phone, go to contrabassconversations.com, subscribe to the podcast. It's free. If you haven't, you can get it any way that you listen to podcasts. And also download our free Contrabass Conversations app for iOS, Kindle, Android. It's full of not only all the podcast episodes going back to Super Awkward episode 1, but instructional videos, sheet music, and writing about the bass going well over 13, 14 years back. I try to make it as useful a resource as you can, so I'd love it if you checked it out and used it and shared it, and that's what it's all about. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and award-winning bass maker Mitch Mooring. Learn more about what he does at his website, mitchmooring.com. And thank you to Krista Copper of the Backstage Creative for all her hard work behind the scenes, cataloging and archiving everything we talk about in these episodes. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.